Hi, welcome. You're listening to People, Planet, Food, conversations about the global food system that I hope are a cause for optimism and a call to action. I'm Roger Robson-Williams, Chief Sustainability Officer here at Plant and Food Research, and I'm interested in how to grow healthy, enjoyable and affordable food in ways that don't harm people or planet. In this podcast series, I'm talking to some of the inspiring people that I've met along the way about what needs to change if we're to have healthy people, living on a healthy planet and eating healthy food. In this episode of People, Planet, Food, I'm delighted to be talking again with co-creator of the Future Fit Business Benchmark, Martin Rich. We first published a podcast on that topic of the Future Fit Business Benchmark back in May 2024. I'm also delighted to be talking with Saskia Verraes, Director of Impact at Proxima Consulting and a social entrepreneur. Welcome to you both.
Good day. Good to be back.
So, Martin, just to start with you, how come you're back in Aotearoa so soon after your last visit?
Well, the short answer is I just love being here, so any excuse is good. Technically, I'm here on summer, winter holiday, depending which side of the hemisphere we're on. So Christmas holidays with the family in Sydney. But if I'm coming to this part of the world, then here to see you and the local chapter of the Future Fit Foundation, which we are collectively setting up here in Aotearoa, New Zealand.
And it's great to have you back here, Martin.
Thank
you. For listeners who want to find out more about Martin and the Future Fit Business Benchmark, I would encourage you to have a listen to that 14th of May 2024 podcast. And I won't introduce Martin any more formally than to say he is an international sustainability professional and a very good friend of Plant and Food Research. Saskia, however, does need a bit more of an introduction. As I mentioned, she's Director of Impact at Proxima Consulting, another good friend of Plant and Food Research, an organisation that actually helped us to really get started on our own sustainability journey. And in fact, as a team, that's what Proxima do. They help businesses embrace systemic change and broaden their capability and scope of their sustainability efforts. And we've certainly experienced that help here. Saskia's got over 2 decades of experience in leading sustainability, innovation and change management across a range of sectors and holds all sorts of certifications in sustainability, innovation, social change and impact. As well as that, Saskia is a social entrepreneur and co-leads Crowd Doing and is CEO and founder of Match for Action. So Crowd Doing is a global initiative that harnesses the collective intelligence and micro-leadership of global volunteers, driving systemic change through social innovation and making aspirational impact goals achievable. And Match for Action is a dynamic network led by Stanford-trained change leaders, bringing together diverse innovators worldwide who collaborate to accelerate positive transformation across the globe. So really interested to hear more about all of those hats you wear. So perhaps, Saskia, you could introduce yourself a bit to our listeners this morning.
Thank you, Roger. Well, you've already done a really good job, so I'm not sure what I need to add to that. But I could maybe give a little bit of an insight into all those different hats, and I actually have a few more on top of that too, and how I got to be there. You can probably hear from my accent that I'm not originally from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I am originally from the Netherlands, and I grew up in a very consciously aware family. Both my parents were teachers. My dad especially was a geography, geology, ecology teacher, plus he had many other topics. As you were at the time, when you were a high school teacher, you basically had to know everything. They were just very passionate about learning and about traveling. So we always, in any other holidays that we had, which was a lot because they were both teachers, we would travel around Europe, and Dad would show us the sources of the rivers and the mountains and all that sort of thing, and would take photos to take back to his classes, but at the same time, obviously, teach us. And at the same time, also, they were very interested in people and communities and would always take us to people and communities to see how other people lived, so to show us that. So that was part of my upbringing. And the other really big part of my upbringing was stories about my granddad. So that was my mom's dad, who unfortunately died just before I was born. But he was the counselor in charge during World War II, or at least he was asked to step up. When the Germans had occupied, the mayor had been kidnapped and the second in charge had to go into hiding because of that. And they asked my granddad, who was part of the council, to step up and be the representative to the Germans, which he did. And at the same time, he was the head of the resistance. So the stories were always about how on earth did that happen and how could the kids deal with that, knowing that in the house that they lived, they had to receive the occupiers as well as were hiding food and were hiding people. And so that, to me, grounded me in being able to change systems from within. So being able to do that with both heads and actually be respected by the people that you not necessarily liked, but knew you had to work with, and at the same time make the changes you needed to make so that the system could change, which was after the war. And he became the mayor because of that work that he did. They asked him to step in and become the mayor of the town and then, get to lead the town out of the misery that they'd had throughout the war. So I grew up with all that and knew that I also wanted to do that. I wanted to change the world. I wanted to make sure that I did the best I could for not just for myself, but definitely for the communities. And that became, beyond my hometown to the Netherlands and then Europe and then, further the world sort of thing. And so I always thought I wanted to be at work for the UN. That was originally what I thought would be the ultimate place to change the world, until I found out in my internship when I did a Master's of Public Administration that it was all very political, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is totally not what I feel I need to do. So I love learning, so I done an enormous amount of courses on top of just what I needed to do. So I could actually finish with Masters in Public and Business Administration and jumped into the business side, because I thought, well, actually, through business, you can make a lot more change, and the old things move a lot faster. So I jumped into tourism at the time, from the ground up, worked my way up, and wanted to change the world and also travel the world. So ended up actually living in Australia after traveling, and still in tourism, travel. I was always the change manager, project manager, program manager. Sustainability wasn't really a role yet when I sort of started working, but I was always the hippie in the company. I was always leading the green teams, and people would point to me if things weren't right and that sort of thing, not just from an environmental perspective, but also the ethical perspective and standing up for people if they weren't treated well and that sort of thing. So through the job that I had in Australia, I ended up in Aotearoa New Zealand, and ultimately then ended up at Tourism Holdings, where I became the Chief Sustainability Officer. And when I'd reached that point, I thought, I've learned so much, I need to spread the word more. So I had an opportunity to go into education and set up a postgraduate course called Leading Change for Good and a micro-credential Leading Beyond Sustainability, where I got to teach everything. I got to dump my brain into these courses and teach everything that I'd learned on how you could actually change businesses from within and organizations from within. And with that, changing all the systems around it by the methodologies applied. And then I realized that was fantastic, very inspirational to work with all the people that were learning. But when they went back into their organizations, their executives and boards weren't ready for that type of leader. So I realized I needed to step back into also influencing the executives and boards, which is when I got in touch with Proxima, who I knew because I'd worked with them as a customer at THL as well, and said, can I join you to actually help change the executives and boards? And so I became part of the Proxima team, part owner now of Proxima, and do that now full time, although I still love doing capability building, which we do through Proxima, but also I love doing it ground up through mentoring. I do a lot of mentoring of young women, especially, that I see, just need the confidence generally to actually be the leaders they can be to change the world. And then on that journey, alongside, I realized that I needed to do more on being here in Aotearoa, which is fantastic, but I realized I'm still a global citizen too, so I wanted to do more on a global level from a systems perspective. So that is where I set up the not-for-profit Match for Action in California with people that I'd met at Stanford. And with Match for Action, we joined forces with another social enterprise and set up and run now Crowd Doing, which is trying to bring volunteers along, people that want to do good, people that want to learn something new, people that want to apply their skills, whatever situation that is. Often it is people that are in career breaks or people that have just graduated and want to get some practical skills for what they've learned, but at the same time do something good with their time. So we have about 3,000 volunteers working on all sorts of social innovation gaps. And that sort of satisfies my need to do the global thing, because people are from all over the world, and I get to meet between 100 and 200 new volunteers every 2 weeks that are, wanting to do something and bring amazing things. And we can help them as well, being the micro leaders that they can be and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's a short but too long probably story.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing, some personal reflections on kind of where you come from, I guess, from an intergenerational perspective, and giving us more of an idea of what your brand of social entrepreneurship looks like. And I was just reflecting, I should probably have mentioned that Martin is an ex kind of financier, essentially an
kind of financier,
from the banking sector, and anybody would struggle to describe Martin as a sort of hippie type, and we have Saskia, who is self-identified certainly in the past as being a bit hippie-ish, and I just think it's wonderful, the diversity of people that are coming together to help address the polycrisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and growing social inequity that we so urgently need to tackle. So in case I forget, thank you both very much for giving up a bit of time to have this conversation together. So Martin, you run the Future Fit Foundation. You've co-founded the Future Fit Business Benchmark and spent the last number of years focused on trying to enable businesses to take action on sustainability. I'm interested in actually hearing from both of you, but perhaps Martin first, what your vision for the future is. What future are you trying to help build through your work?
Yeah, it's a great question. Funnily enough, just earlier this year, a couple of months ago, I was invited out to a conference in Brazil where we're looking to kickstart Future Fit in South America. And a couple of people who they designated as futurists, which I was quite pleased to be able to snag that title now, were asked to present a vision of the world in 2070. And as it was the second time this year that I'd sort of been asked about a long-term vision, and I suddenly realized that I could give a very sort of scientific principles, future fit type answer to what does the future look like. And honestly, it was the sort of answer that would, send most of your listeners to sleep within about 20 seconds.
Which actually might be the purpose of many people listening to the podcast. We don't know.
Well, indeed so. That could be, actually. Maybe you should check the listening hours. But I realized from that I needed to actually have a more visceral vision of this future fit future. So I wrote myself a letter from 2070, which I then read out at the conference. And I'm hoping in the new year, we're going to sort of try and put this out on social media and see if we can start to crowdsource visions from the future. So if your listeners aren't asleep, they might want to keep an eye out for that. You can give them the link in the new year. But for me, it was trying to put into vision and words, what does it actually look like to have this flourishing future? What does the transport of the future look like? I was talking about shared transport, lots of pod-based flight. The films were right. The future, we will all be flying. It's just probably going to be pods rather than levitating cars. I talked about the food. I talked about wine because I like wine. I talked about the way that technology enabled us to connect with people around the world, but in a way that was very, very visceral and, fully immersive. But yet it was a future where we still interacted with people physically as we do today. So sort of that blend between using the power of the technology, but not actually all retreating into machines and we become incredibly insular. I talked about a world where war had not happened for 25 years. I talked about a future where we'd actually just dipped back under the 1.5 degree target, that the personal carbon budgets were therefore able to increase again because we'd come back under that. But people didn't care anymore because we'd actually changed how we lived. So I think what that enabled me to do was suddenly to start seeing in far more real and accessible terms what an amazing future we could have. And that would be accessible to everybody, not just the, middle and upper classes from the wealthy nations, but actually that would become fundamentally available to all. And I'm sure we'll go into this more in a moment, but in a world of increasing uncertainty, political, inward-looking politicians who are inward-looking and more right-leaning, typically around the world, a lot to be concerned about. And yet, for me, this vision is real. And picking up on what Saskia was saying, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people, millions of people, hopefully, around the world who want to do more, who want the world to be different. How do we connect them together, and how do we empower them and realize that there are probably actually many, many, many more of them than the very small number of, sadly, very rich and very powerful individuals who actually seem to drive the agenda.
Thanks, Martin. A really interesting device for helping, I guess, clarify in your own mind and share your kind of vision for the future. So, Saskia,
maybe I am a hippie after all.
Maybe there's a little bit of hippie-ishness in there somewhere. Yeah. So, Saskia, you're working. I mean, it frankly sounds beyond tirelessly to try and make things better on all sorts of different fronts. So, what is the future that you're working towards? What does that look like?
Well, actually, I take inspiration from nature, and it's definitely not in the detail that Martin has been describing, but I really look for the future where everything is back in balance. And if you look at a good balanced ecosystem, like a beautiful piece of rainforest where everything is just in balance and the trees keep growing, like growth, is almost used often as a negative word. But if you look in ecosystem, obviously there is growth, but it's good growth, right? And the soil gets regenerated and everybody has access to the things they need to stay in balance. And I mean, that is not very specific with goals and that sort of thing, really, when you start looking at that. But that's the vision sort of thing. And then you can backcast from that to actually go, so what does that actually mean? And what are the things we do need to change? And where are the gaps? And that's, with the social innovation gaps is that level that we work with at crowd-doing, for instance. And there are so many, obviously, as we all know. Yeah, it is definitely around bringing everybody back in balance, because completely out of balance at the moment. And that's to do with, with the inequality that was just mentioned. And indeed, the way that we eat, the way that we don't grow food, but just buy it from the fridge in the supermarket sort of thing. But getting that back in balance, that people understand that and build a capability around that and building that up. And it will evolve the way that we are dealing with that also alongside technology, because technology is going to be part of our future, and which is a good thing if we manage to keep it in balance, right? And that we don't let it overtake everything else, because then it's, again, pushes everything else out of balance. So
thank you. I mean, I personally find, both kind of visions compelling, but the concept especially of learning from nature and saying what does balance look like and how do we get back in balance, and in particular, I guess in my area of interest around the food system, what does that look like? And I guess that leads me to the question, and I guess maybe I'll throw this to you first, Saskia. What kind of needs to be true? What needs to be different from today for us to start moving towards that kind of greater sense of balance? Where do you see the most problematic imbalances that we need to address?
That is a very good question, and there are many angles you can take in that. Obviously, I look at it from a systemic perspective, and the way that our current system is designed has been designed in a way to push things out of balance towards a certain weight for a certain group of people. So that in itself is completely out of balance and needs to shift. And to shift that, you need to give people that understanding and to actually explain to them why certain things are happening, what that actually means to them, and how they can help shift that. And that actually means that they're going to go towards a more balanced system for themselves, for the future, for their community and the things around them. And so for me, the imbalance shows up already everywhere in the way that we teach our kids. If you look at the curriculums at schools and what they teach is still the old-fashioned ways of how our systems work. And, when I spoke about, setting up the course Leading Change for Good, that was all about teaching about what does it actually mean leading with purpose? Like, how do you run a business leading with purpose versus how do you run a business that needs to make profit first? And all our MBAs still teach how to run a business making profit. And yes, they might tag on a bit of sustainability now, which they do often. You get invited for a guest lecture and you can talk about sustainability one time amongst the whole MBA. So that's why capability building is so incredibly important. And it is not because most people are doing these things because they hate the other people. It is just because our system has built us to think that way. And our banks make us having to work for money only because they're not going to take saying, sorry, this month I'm just going to focus on impact. I don't care about, making money this month. Bank is going, no, you have to pay your mortgage, right? So all of that and building that together and building that capability of being able to look at every decision that we make, taking all those things into account and maybe then making a slightly different decision and creating that awareness around people, to me, is the most important thing.
And I think I see kind of green shoots of that happening even just this year. I mean, I had a wonderful conversation with Catherine Leaper, who's a learning advisor from the Climate Action Campus in Aotearoa, Christchurch, and the work that they're doing with rangatahi, with students around empowering them to take action on climate, to understand the implications of it, and have a go at growing their own food, at repairing things. And that really gives me hope. That feels like a very powerful leverage point that speaks to some of what you're saying. And I had to smile when you mentioned about that kind of MBA courses and people like us being invited to give one kind of guest lecture after dinner one evening, and it does feel sometimes a bit like an add-on. But Martin, to you, so we were talking about this on the way here, what needs to be true, and I love this expression. I'm just going to acknowledge a very good friend, Ariel Muller, who currently lives in Singapore, who introduced me to that way of thinking, what needs to be true for a prosperous future world. And Martin, I know you've given this a lot of thought, and the Future Fit Business Benchmark is founded on 8 principles, and perhaps that might be a starting point for you.
Yeah, and it is it's a systemic issue, as Saskia says, and I think the problem is we talk about the energy system, we talk about the food system, and yes, they are a system in as much as there are lots of players within them that interact in some way, shape, or form. But the problem is that because of the shareholder value paradigm that we operate in, these individual players are not actually acting overall in the pursuit of the right outcome for a flourishing society. They're doing their thing in their bit of the market. They collaborate with others as they need to, but nobody has sat down, and I can't think of a single country where, for example, the government or whoever has said, right, what we need is a regenerative food system that makes highly nutritious, good quality food available at affordable prices for everybody in the country. And that system needs to be resilient and blah, 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 right? That doesn't happen. What we have is a whole series of farmers, shops, manufacturers, middle people, blah, blah, blah. And all of these are acting in their own way, which means the vast majority are simply there trying to make as much money as they can with as little trouble as possible. There's a small and thankfully growing percentage who are trying to do this in a better way. But there is not a coherent system acting for the overall good. You and I yesterday, Roger, were talking a bit about the energy system. Same thing, right? You've got the energy generators, you've got the transmission folks, you've got the last mile folks, and you've got 101 people actually trying to sell you the electrons flowing through the door, as it were. But again, nobody's really gone back and said, what does it mean to design a grid that gives renewable, affordable energy and access to everybody in a smart manner that now takes account of the fact that, your car can now be a battery that connects to the grid and takes from and gives back. So you don't end up with a coherent system that's trying to take us in that direction. And food is one of those examples. So, the challenge then becomes how do you sort of get there from here? Because you absolutely wouldn't start from this point. And the inertia in the overall system then makes it very hard to unwind. Again, as Saskia says, if you suddenly went back to your bank and said, right, I'm not going to be paying you the interest on my loans for the next year because I'm helping to rewire the overall food system, I mean, they'd probably just throw you out in the street. So it's a hugely complex challenge to move from here to that point. But I think if we can at least start to get this point across and say, actually, the pre-competitive element here should be a sort of a co-design of at least those overall principles of what in Aotearoa New Zealand would a regenerative, healthy food system look like, something that Plant and Food and your various partners, hopefully are thinking about. Then can you start to get the individual players within that start coming together and saying, actually, yeah, that's what we want to create. It's better for society. It's better for the planet. It's better for the country. There's massive benefits to it, but it's not an easy journey from here.
No, and again, definitely not an easy journey. But again, I think I am seeing and have seen over the past kind of 12 months some more green shoots in that space. So, I mean, in Aotearoa New Zealand, Angela Clifford leading an initiative to try and do exactly what you're talking about in terms of creating a national food strategy that could begin to do that. And in the UK, where you're from, Sue Pritchard leading some really interesting work around conversations with citizens about actually what they want from the food system and sort of debunking some of the myths that kind of are rolled out very often around people just want kind of cheap food and so on. And actually it's much more nuanced than that. So there are some incredible leaders trying to make headway in this space. And, on that question of have we seen green shoots? So I'm interested, Saskia, and it doesn't have to be related to the food system. I'm thinking more generally action towards this prosperous future that is in greater balance than it is now. Have you observed, let's say, over the last 12 months, some encouraging signs?
Yeah, it's a really good question, obviously, because that goes towards my radical optimism that I try to maintain too. But coming back to the food system, I mean, as Proxima, we tried to start addressing that as well, and created like a pilot event called Future Fit Restaurant to try and see who we could bring together of the food system in Auckland to start with, and seeing how much interest there is and how much people actually do want to participate and do want to try and fix it, because most of the people, especially the chefs, actually, because they really care about their produce, right? And they really want to understand where the things come from and want to actually prefer to work with locally produced foods and meet the suppliers and all that sort of thing. I mean, that's what they do. That's their passion. So it's unfortunately many times in the systems that they work, in the restaurants, businesses that they work, they do not get that choice. But if they get the choice, they will definitely participate, right? And help influence it and that sort of thing. And from the consumer's perspective, at the end of it too, like, people want to know, not everybody, but you can definitely see, a growing movement for people that want to give up meat and want to know what to do with all the veg and don't want to waste any food. They want to know, but they don't know, and they don't know where to go for it and all that sort of thing as part of it. And definitely if you look over the last 12 months, you see many initiatives actually starting in those spaces, whether it's to do with the waste of food and recreating that or regifting it, or on supermarket levels, on restaurant levels, on community levels. I live in Beach Haven as well. The amount of food that gets redistributed amongst the community is amazing. Like, people reach out going, unfortunately, but I mean, this is the sad side of it too, that they're saying at the end of the month, I've actually run out of money. Can anybody help me? My kids have no food in the next few days. But the number of people that just go, oh yeah, I've got this, I've got that, I'll hand it over. And we've got, the community pantry that is always full of stuff for people to pick up. Now, it is obviously a sign of a broken system that has to happen. But at the same time, you can see that there are people stepping up in that space to sort of go, we can help each other. And how are we going to do this long term? How are we, and people are stepping into the entrepreneurial space to sort of go, oh, actually, this happens every month. How can we make this into something, and I can make a living and I can train others and we can do something locally. So those types of things, and that's just talking about the food space, are definitely visible, and you just have to look for the good, really. I mean, that's the sad thing about the media, I find, is that they could report every day on fantastic things that are happening, but obviously they still get the click rates from the crappy stuff, and the stuff that gets reported in New Zealand sometimes on the front pages. You go, why on earth? Why don't you tell the story of the amazing entrepreneurs that we have around New Zealand? Because there are many, there really are, and they all do amazingly inspiring things. And if we could help accelerate that and give them the tools, because often they don't know how to actually expand their good thing that they're doing. They just do what they do, and but that's the type of thing that we can help with. That gives further hope, right? But yeah, you asked about the green shoots, and we just need to water them and feed them to actually help grow.
Thanks, and that is a nice kind of segue for me just to reflect on a kind of wonderful meeting I had in Te Puke with Ian Lees-Galloway from the Aotearoa Food Rescue Alliance, and that meeting was catalysed by a concerned citizen that actually listened to the podcast I recorded with Angela Clifford and Sue Pritchard, and was interested in gleaning, in second harvesting from orchards where edible but not marketable fruit sometimes goes to waste. And so that led to us meeting at the Plant and Food site in Te Puke to look at whether we could do a pilot run of second harvesting of kiwi fruit that were left over in some of our orchards after the experimental work that we'd done, and then redistributing that through food rescue organisations to people who need food. And that I found very humbling and encouraging that a concerned citizen would reach out. And I guess one of the reasons for mentioning that now is at the end of these podcasts, I always invite listeners to get in touch if they've got an idea of somebody perhaps I should chat to, or something they just want to share, and just to encourage people that we do actually kind of listen. And in this case, hopefully that connection will lead to something really good. Anyway, that's an aside. So Martin, green shoots, you're living in a different part of the world. You're living in a different hemisphere to Saskia and myself. Are you seeing green shoots?
Yeah, definitely. As we've said, the challenges are numerous. And I totally agree with the comment on the media. It's super hard often to sort of find the good news stories, either buried or at all. But, similarly, we're seeing huge numbers of individuals who are trying to do good things. We're seeing businesses, either existing ones changing or new ones starting, and trying to address many of these different issues that we've already touched on, and actually embed this very nature of being a regenerative, a future fit style business from the ground up. And ultimately, that's always going to be an awful lot easier to sort of do it that way from day one, rather than trying to retrofit, back into something that's got all of the sort of the inertia and the corporate DNA set up the wrong way from day one. And I mean, I think the Future Fit restaurant thing that you did down here is amazing. We're looking to see whether we can replicate something like that, either in the UK or somewhere on mainland Europe. Certainly, if I look at the sort of the northwestern part of Europe, so Saskia's home of Holland and sort of up and western there's a huge amount of stuff happening in the food space in terms of sort of the precision fermentation, 3D printed meat as it's so called. I mean, it's sort of completely the wrong term really, but I love it. So many organizations trying to make these products the norm, to make them acceptable, to break down the barriers, both from the chef's side of thing, but also from the consumer side of things. But at the same time, we really do have to address the issue of cost and affordability. The food sharing, food banks, as they're known in the UK. I don't know what the equivalent is here, but the idea that there's a place where people who can afford it will donate the food, and then through various routes, those who need access can go and get that food for free or for a token payment. It's brilliant that those things exist and that there is a safety net. At the same time, it's hard. They shouldn't need to exist. But again, there's the reality of the system that we've created is that the cost of food, like so many other things, is not a true representation. The price you pay is not a representation of the cost. And people have got used to poor quality food being cheap. And so and again, sort of little green shoots. I think there's a recognition now that we need to find ways and means to tackle the fact that, it's all well and good politicians standing up and saying you should eat, 5 fruit and veg a day or 7 fruit and veg a day or whatever it should be, and you should cut down on. If you can barely afford to feed your kids tomorrow, certainly in the UK, and my hunch is it would be the same here, you cannot afford 5 lots of fruit and veg every day, and you literally can only afford to go and buy the most processed, lowest quality food from, I won't embarrass any retailers here, but we know the types of names, right? But again, in some ways you can't even blame the retailers for, they're just responding to the system and they've spotted their opportunity. But there's a growing recognition that therefore that needs to change. So that's the tiniest of green shoots, but the recognition at least then starts to lead to, okay, well, how do we change that system? And the number of organizations that we now see trying to provide products into the space, incredibly difficult. We're in the very early stages of a lot of this stuff, and we know from history that that will be littered with failures and bankruptcies and organizations that never quite got it off the ground. But many will, and that is forcing change in the incumbent players. Again, Roger, we're talking earlier this morning, about some of the big fast food chains. Now, okay, a whole different conversation about the value of those. But the fact that they now have non-meat alternatives or salads or whatever, at least speaks to the fact that they're recognizing that the world is changing around them. Now, what is the place for them in a future fit, flourishing society? You could have a whole podcast just on that. Mm-hmm. But to me, it's good that we're at least seeing these things happening. And for sure, the food system is not going to end up staying where it is today. Do we get it to where the three of us would envision it? Well, let's come back in 20 years' time and see.
Thank you. Thanks, Martin. And I just want to pick up, Saskia, on something you mentioned in passing, which I think is super important in this conversation. You mentioned kind of radical optimism, and it can be difficult to remain hopeful when you work on a daily basis in the sustainability space because, of course, progress is slower than we'd like. Some of the problems seem so intractable and systemic and entrenched and all this kind of stuff. So I'm interested in talking about hope. And since you raised it, what does radical optimism mean for you, and how do you remain radically optimistic?
Yeah, it's a conscious choice, really. It's really, like I said, I mean, it's easy enough to find all the bad news, and it's not just news, it is science, right? We know scientific facts. If you just look at that, you can easily go downhill and blubber, which is also fine, for a bit. But it's not going to be helpful. It's not, you won't be a thriving person yourself if you just give in to it's all, we can't do anything anymore. So it is consciously actually looking for the good and looking at where can you see hope and where can you see the green shoots, and mentoring, for instance, for me is part of that, where I can work with young women that are going to go into businesses, as in they've generally, just graduated or, are sort of in their early stage career, and seeing how amazing they are and seeing what they will be able to bring to the businesses. And you can see that that's going to help so much with the changes that we need to make. And it's the same with, me working with volunteers, but it's also looking at the changes that we can see, and that, like, even in working with the corporates as we do with Proxima. Now, no, they aren't making the changes at the pace that we really would like them to make the changes. However, the businesses that we work with and the changes that we see, and the fact that they actually reach out to us, knowing that we are pretty critical, we want to be, and we're very open about that. But they actually want to work with us. They want to understand the impacts that they make, positive and negative. They want to create better strategies. They want to make sure that they do the right thing for their people, for the long term, for the communities and that sort of thing. All that does give hope. You can look at it the other way. You can look at, the glass half empty sort of thing. But at the same time, I force myself, like I really want to be and inspire people to continue doing things, because optimism does drive that a lot more, in my opinion, than doing, sometimes you have to use the stick, but, it's much better to do it in an optimistic way for yourself as well.
Yeah. Thank you. And Martin, ex-banker, part hippie, it would appear. How do you remain? I can't see you as a hippie. I'm sorry, buddy, but how do you remain hopeful?
Well, I think everything that Saskia's just said I completely agree with. And I think when you can just open your eyes and look around and see the beauty of the planet, see the beauty of human nature. No, it really do sound like a reborn hippie. My bank friends would have no idea what I'm talking about. But I every day you can just see the amazing creativity, love, relationship, and the beautiful side of human nature. And we're all light and dark, sadly, but the light is amazing. And how do we kindle more of that? And sadly, we've created this system, again to use the word, where so many people in the world just never have the opportunity to fan that flame, because life and the postcode lottery has never given them the opportunity to do that. Every day is survival. The three of us sat in this room are incredibly fortunate that, again, through parentage or hard work or whatever it was, I don't think any of the three of us were particularly born with a silver spoon in our mouths, but we're given that amazing opportunity and encouraged by our parents. Saskia, your parents were teachers and showed you the world. My dad worked incredibly hard to give us an opportunity, and my mum instilled many of the values that I think are still there in me today. Her view was, if you want to be a bin man, that's totally fine. It was a garbage collector here. I don't know whatever the right term is, but it's like, but be the best bin man you can. There's nothing wrong with that. Just be the best you can at whatever you do. Work as hard as you can. Try as hard as you can. And I think, it's those sorts of opportunities that so many people just don't have. either because of the country they were born in, the political system they live in, the wealth or lack of wealth and opportunity that's available to them. So I guess I want to free people to be able to step into all that they can be. And so trying to rewire the system. I'm an engineer by training. I'm an engineer at heart. I fix things. I see problems. I try and repair them. And that really is sort of what I'm trying in a very small way to do with Future Fit, to rewire the system and give people that opportunity and freedom that the current system just doesn't have. And if that can't give you optimism and help you to drag yourself out of bed in the early hours of the morning when you're 12 hours out in your body clock, then what's going to?
Yeah, thank you both for that. And I just reflect that people listening to this podcast presumably have some interest in, well, people, planet and food, have some interest in sustainability and addressing some of the existential threats that face humanity. And that can seem big and it can seem very depressing and hard at times. And I guess my comment would be for people in that situation to be kind to themselves and to others, and recognize that it's hard and it can feel quite isolating when you take too much of this on yourself personally, and just be encouraged that there are lots of other people out there working in this space.
And what gives you optimism?
In a sense, you and Saskia have covered it. I guess for me, it is a more of an act of will than an emotional state. For the reasons Saskia mentioned, that's important for me to kind of keep going. And I think, and this is something I was talking to my wife about, or she was talking to me about, let's be honest, earlier this week, that, this is about trying to create the future that we think is necessary for the next generations of humans to prosper. It's not actually about saving the planet. It's about holding open that possibility that those that come after us will have opportunities to flourish, to express themselves, to have good quality, healthy food and live on a stable planet. And that seems something worth working towards. I'm not sure that quite answers your question, Martin. Probably the short answer, frankly, is conversations with people like you. That is where I get my energy from. So thank you both for sharing your time. In terms of what people might do, I want to wrap this conversation up now. But Saskia, if you were going to suggest to a listener what they might do in their own lives, should they have the capacity to do anything, to kind of make the world a better place, what would you suggest they make a start on?
Well, there's actually one thing that I forgot to mention in regards to optimism, and that is nature. And spending time in nature is uplifting. And looking at how nature, the thing that happened during our lockdown still, to me, gives such an amazing, uplifting feeling. Like you saw nature just recover. And to me, that is, if people, want to start with something, and there's also a lot of proof in regards to spending time in nature helps with loads of things, like helps reduce anxiety, helps reduce depression, helps you recover quicker from diseases and all that sort of thing. And just trying to spend more time in nature, I think, will actually make people kinder and understand more about what it is that we're actually trying to do. So that is a very simple thing. It's good for you. Do it together with others. That's even better, because we are a social species. And then on top of that, if you have more time, indeed, look around you and listen to what's going on and see if you just can start helping your neighbor, or can start, thinking about what I was just saying in regards to your community. See if there's something that happens every month or every year or whatever where there is help needed, and see if you can do something with that. It doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be a big thing if you want to be. There's heaps of stuff. You can join volunteering organizations. You could join, crowd doing if you're interested in, doing more virtually with research and that sort of thing. But so there is a load of opportunities. which do take time. And I understand that, not everybody has time for that. So that's why I'm sort of going, if you just look around where you are and take that time out for yourself to just take time in nature to reflect on what's going on and be in the moment. I mean, it's so good for all of us. And it is good for nature too, that we get that connection back, because that is one of the things as well, like we've forgotten, right? We've forgotten that connection that we obviously as a species have with nature. I mean, we're part of it. And when you say it's not about saving the planet, to me, it is also about saving the planet, because nature, we've stepped on it. Like we've forgotten, we've stepped on the indigenous people that actually do, have that in as part of their worldviews, that we are fully connected, and we are fully connected. And that's what we do need to understand more. And by just go down to the park and spend half an hour a day or whatever, and it will help.
Thank you. And just to kind of qualify my comment about it not being saving the planet, I guess my point is some people dismiss efforts around sustainability on the basis that it's just about, I don't know, some obscure species of animal that's going to become extinct and who cares kind of thing. But actually the big picture here is, if you want customers to sell stuff to in the future, you really need to be paying attention to biodiversity loss and climate change, et cetera, because as the planet becomes more unstable, the economic system will start to collapse. And ultimately, if things get too bad, the human society as we know it now is unlikely to kind of persist. So at that rather self-serving level, we need to really pay attention to these things to have a functioning society as we know it today going forward. Absolutely, I agree. And your invitation for people to reconnect with nature is so important. And that whole point about we are absolutely part of it, not a part from it, is very well made. Thank you. Martin, final word on that.
I think it's all been said. I'd encourage people to make that positive choice of will to try and at least once a day get out of that negative mindset and try to the extent you can in the circumstances you are in to put that positive mindset in. Invest in nature, invest in other people, invest in relationships, again, to the extent you can, even if that's just looking out of your window and being grateful for a bit of grass or a tree that you can see, or grateful for a relationship. Do you need to let go of things? Is there somebody you need to forgive from 10, 20 years ago, for something they don't even remember that they did? The amount of mental health studies that show how negative, we hold on to things. Just try and, what's the expression, cultivate an attitude of gratitude. Once a day, just say thank you for something. And try and see those positives. Switch off your phone, switch off the news. Or if that's too hard, at least go and find a good story. They do exist. Go and find some of the local news providers or websites that focus actually on good news stories. Stop reading just the negative stuff. I mean, probably, it's helpful to know what's going on in the world, but find that positive stuff. Find those local good stories. And to the extent that, again, you're able to, as an individual, find something that you can go and get involved in that's helping others around you. And I think through that, it starts to just turn your whole outlook on life around. Doesn't mean everything's going to be rosy and amazing. And I get that, it could be that some people listening to this are, not in great situations. But it will absolutely help to change that mindset. It will help your mental health. It'll help your outlook on life, and it will enable you to have that slightly more optimistic view that, I can play a role in this. Build that self-esteem, build that confidence, and just join with others in trying to make your neighborhood or your town or your city or your country, or if you're stupid enough to, like we are, to think about the world as a whole, how can you can make that little bit of positive difference. You might just make quite a big bit of difference.
Thank you for that. So this podcast has been a bit more reflective than many. And, we're sitting here at the end of 2024. looking back on what for many people has been quite a challenging year, and looking ahead to 2025, which seems to have the potential to be quite a turbulent time globally and here in Aotearoa New Zealand. But I hope that you will take some encouragement from listening to Saskia and Martin and hearing about some of the things that we can all do, some of the great initiatives that are already underway globally. And I guess wrapping this up for this podcast, have you both given me cause for hope? Well, yes, you have. Sharing the green shoots that you're seeing, and as I mentioned, the energy that I get from these sorts of conversations with great people like you. So thank you for that. Have you issued a bit of a call to action for those that have the capacity to act, even if it's a question of being kinder to yourself? Yes, you have, and some great pointers there. So thank you for that. Maybe that's not that I want to date stamp this too much, but maybe that's a bit of a gift for listeners. So thanks for that. And for you listeners out there, thank you very much for listening to this episode of my podcast series. We've referred during this one to a number of previous episodes. I'd encourage you, if you haven't already listened to them, obviously to do so. And if you're interested in more conversations about people, planet and food, please subscribe to Sigest and rate and review this show, which is really helpful for us. So please do that. And more importantly, even than that, is share with anybody else who you think might be interested in these kind of conversations. And if you've got any questions, or as I mentioned earlier, suggestions for people that you think I might have a conversation with on some of these topics, please do get in touch on sigest@plantandfood.co.nz. And looking ahead, I'm really looking forward through 2025 to speaking to a lot more people about how we can create a prosperous future and a more sustainable food system. Until then, mā te wā. See you next time.